Morning, everybody. It's 4:30 in the morning, and last night, about 10 o'clock, I went round, check everything's okay in the farmyard, and had a torch with me because it was dark, and I counted 37 swallows, all adults. Some are nesting, some are incubating eggs already. And I just thought I'd go back in that stable block that I visited 2 or 3 weeks ago and just have a listen, because there's about a dozen in this particular stable. I'll be walking in amongst some horses, so there's still some early morning chomping going on, the remnants of last night's hay. So here we go, let's have a little listen. That's the way to start the day. Absolutely delightful. Right, let's go out on the farm. Oh, it's a blackbird just in front of me.
Chris Skinner's Countryside Podcast with Matthew Gudgeon.
Overcast but dry and heading towards the end of May. It's nearly going to be flaming June. But we're here virtually in shirt sleeves, so it's pretty pleasant here, and a lovely vista of yellow on this field. I'm joined by the top person here on High Ash Farm. There's Rat the terrier, and Chris Skinner's here as well. Hello, Chris.
Yes, you get it the right way round, Matthew, yes.
Rat's having a sneeze up.
He is, yes. Hey, Ratty, good boy. He's flying round. Yes, I knew he'd have the first word. What are you doing? Anyway, Matthew, we're standing in a 30-acre field, and there's several fields like this at High Ash Farm, and it's just a sight for sore eyes, the only way you can describe it. It's quite a rare sight these days, because this is a wildflower field, and it's providing pollen and nectar right through spring, summer, and even into autumn, with the whole variety of wildflowers. I can see clover down there, and this just bright yellow, everything we can see at the moment. This plant is meadow buttercup, Ranunculus acris is the scientific name, and it used to be a huge problem in pastures. It's slightly toxic for many farmland animals. Things like sheep generally will graze around it, cattle will graze around it, but if horses graze it, it can cause digestive problems. So it's a bit of a nuisance weed, and modern agricultural chemicals really have taken care of it, and that's why it's a rare sight, because this field, together with many of the others here at the farm, are not sprayed at all. So it's a tallish plant. It's the tallest member of the buttercup family.
Yes, sort of over knee height, this, isn't
yes,
it?
It is. It's a good 600 mil, 2 feet and higher, and its flowering period is about 3 to 4 weeks. So you come back in a month's time and there'll be not a sign of it, and the field will probably be purple by then, with the next wildflowers that come through, things like sainfoin, white clover in the bottom, and lots of other plants as well. There's about 5 or 6 buttercup species. This one is or was the commonest, I should say, but it's been taken over by another one, which I did battle with in my youth. We had a really old pasture at the farm, and right on the other side of the valley over there, near that house you can see in the distance, and the field would always be bright yellow in June and July, and the cattle used to graze around this particular buttercup, and it actually favoured it because it then gave it space to spread out. So agricultural chemicals were just starting, the hormone weed sprayers from years ago, and it was quite expensive to buy. So my father decided to reseed the field, and he looked at me, and well, I was just about old enough to drive a tractor properly, and there was a rusty old set of discs laying in the corner of the farmyard, which he could use to chop the soil up. So he said, right, go and cultivate that a few times, and then again in a week's time. So I took these rusty old discs, all scratchy and scratchy, hadn't had grease in the bearings for years. I just remember the name. They were called Denning discs, and they were only about 8 feet wide, and I kept doing this pasture to get rid of this buttercup, because what I didn't know, the scientific name of that particular buttercup was Ranunculus repens, which literally means creeping buttercup. So I disced it to death, and then father had got a single furrow Ransom's TS81 plough, which you'd use for deep digging for potatoes, which we grew here, and I ploughed it over a foot deep and put the topsoil down to the bottom of the furrow and turned it over, and there wasn't a sign of a buttercup. So got September, he bought 4 bags of grass seed, and I spread that on and harrowed it all in, rolled it, and it was absolute perfection. It looked like a rolled golf course, a bowling green even. And I then learnt that sometimes nature has the last word. So it got to March the following year, all the grass was up, the cattle were grazing it, and you look down at it and there was literally hundreds and hundreds of tiny buttercup plants. And because I chopped it up and said thank you very much, each one of those little plants produced a new one.
So it divided and multiplied.
Because of me. So instead of it being a tolerable population, in the end we had to spray the field to get rid of it. So I learnt my first scientific sort of a Latin name for buttercups, Ranunculus repens, the creeping buttercup, and I've never forgotten it. But
now you're farming to fill the fields with this lovely yellow, aren't you?
Absolutely. So this one doesn't get, it will get really mown about late August, September time at the end of the flowering season. The last one to flower on here would be something called hardheads or knapweed, a deep purple, and it's a great favourite for goldfinches here. But in the meantime, each week almost you come here, there's a different colour, and as I said, it's quite a rare sight now. So just beautiful. So it's
canary yellow, really, isn't it?
It is, yes, and there's lots of older names for it, because buttercup's actually quite a recent name, the last 250 years only. Before that it was called soldiers' buttons. It had a whole variety of different old English names which were really, really lovely. And the secret was with buttercup, because it's butter yellow, and you could always tell if your girlfriend or a friend like butter, because you'd pick one of those, put it under your chin, and if you saw the yellow reflection under your chin, that just meant you liked butter. So buttercup seems a very appropriate.
Well, I suggest that I tried that, but how many chins would you see under me?
We'd do each one of the 6, so that would be fine. So just look at that. I mean,
it's so beautiful.
It is beautiful. And if the sun comes out, almost guarantee you have to put sunglasses on,
and it's waving in the breeze as well.
It's just trying to break through the sun, through the cloud layer, but it is just extraordinarily beautiful. And that's how the old English countryside used to be. And of course there'd be lots of insects in here, and Rat said that's time, you've done your 5 minutes, Skinner, you've done enough talking, and he had to interrupt. Are you being a good boy down there? He's actually sitting near us because he's going to be lucky because we're going to another venue in a few minutes' time across the other side of the farm, and he will be able to accompany us in there as well. And one of his favourite spots of the farm, because there's lots of rabbit holes and foxes and all sorts. Oh, I just heard a skylark go up and start singing, because it's excellent habitat for nesting birds. And see what I mean? We've gone past the 5 minutes, so Rat says that's time. Let's go and do something proper. That just means somebody's about. We're quite close to a public footpath, and Arminghall Church is in the distance. We're actually in Arminghall this morning, not High Ash Farm at Caister. We're right up on the northern boundary, and this particular plant loves the soil underneath there. It's heavy, damp clay, so it doesn't dry out too easily, and it's absolute perfection for this particular plant.
Great for the pollinators.
And for the pollinators, and lots of bees. As soon as the sun's out, this will be swarming with bees gathering pollen and some nectar from it as well. So there we are. Do you think we both like butter? Yes.
I can't get enough of it, actually.
Look at that. But when the sun's on these, the petals actually almost reflect the sunlight. They actually shine like little mirrors. So an amazing sight. So there we are. Welcome to High Ash, Matthew. Yeah, another week, and this will almost be gone, and because it's been in flower a couple of weeks already.
Well, we're on the edge of one of Chris's large fields here, and we've got the green shoots of recovery coming up through here, haven't we? What have you done with this field?
Matthew, this has just been reseeded about 2 weeks ago, over winter wild bird seed mix, and immediately afterwards there was some heavy rain, and so the ground was very, very soft. And in past podcasts, as we look round the farm, we bump into lots of deer species. On the way here, we've already bumped into a muntjac which scooched off through the hedge. We've seen roe deer, we've seen Chinese water deer. That's 3 species.
About 100 rabbits.
And lots of rabbits. And sometimes when you're out living in the countryside, you look for the signs, because some of the animals, things like badgers, are strictly nocturnal. You see their footprints. Hares and rabbits, particularly in snow or in mud, you see their footprints, so you know that they're there without necessarily seeing them. And there's one of the species of deer, in fact it's the largest mammal in the UK, and they're here quite a lot now. They're red deer. And with the antlers, they're about as tall as you are, and really seriously large animals.
So these are a large species to be surviving and sort of living and coexisting with us in the countryside.
Yes, and that's the problem when they cross roads. There is a lot in Norfolk now, and when I say large, just look down here. These footprints.
This newly planted field with soft...
Look.
Oh, look, my goodness.
There's the 2 cloven hooves, and 2, usually behind them you'll get 2 little dew claw marks because the ground was so soft. Look at that, you can get your fist in that one
deep,
and there.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And so there the footprints of red deer, compared to Rat, who's just arrived, my terrible terrier. He could get all 4 feet in one deer slot, we call them. So there we are, that's just a sign. Another one, lovely one over there where you can see the cloven hooves there, the sort of split between them, and I think there was 5, and they're likely to have all been stags. And it's because at this time of the year the does, hinds, have given birth and they're looking after their charges, and the boys are kind of redundant, so they all go off together, the boys. And well, I did mention last week you all heard of a stag party. Well, this time of the year the mallard are all deserted by the females. It is that way round, and the same with the deer. Their rut from last autumn is well over now, and they're living out in the countryside all by themselves. Anyway, Matthew, just want you to stand up, because we had a quick look at this, and we're now going to see something special, I did promise you.
Well, by the way, where do these deer go the rest of the time?
In this tall areas of woodland, there's 13 areas of woodland here at High Ash Farm, and that's why the habitat's right for them. And the wildflower fields, which we looked at earlier, have crops in which suit deer down to the ground. They have lots of legumes in, things like sandfoin, which is a tall legume, almost looks like a lupin. It's the same family, and it's really high in protein and starch and carbohydrate. Actually, sandfoin comes from the French. It literally means wholesome hay. And so they secrete themselves into woodland, and as long as they're not disturbed, otherwise they can run off out into the sort of open countryside. Generally they're okay, but they cause serious amount of damage if you happen to hit one in your car.
And they've been quite formative of the countryside in Britain, haven't they? Because, I mean,
Yes.
many years ago, our lords and masters and royalty would set aside huge areas of land just to hunt deer.
Yes, hunting was the privilege of the rich and wealthy, and still today sometimes, a lot of, particularly up in Scotland where there are large numbers of red deer, it forms a really useful income for parts of the countryside where you're hard pushed to get a living these days.
But an area like Epping Forest or the New Forest,
Yes.
somewhere like Sherwood Forest, they would just be like royal preserves. wouldn't they?
Absolutely, and different species of deer would be hunted at different times of the year as well. Things like fallow deer as well, and there's several other native species. Well, there's not many native species, many of the others were introduced, but red deer and our roe deer, they're resident native species. So very interesting. Anyway, I promised you a treat, because this last week behind us, a very special show happened. It's called Chelsea, the flower show. Yes. And
Did you win any gold medals this year?
I know I'm about to get a gold medal when I take you through a little bit further into the woodland here, because I think nature can top trump man's best efforts. Just walk in here. The bluebells that were here a couple of weeks ago are flat on the ground.
They've had it for another year. They'll be back. But let's make our way through the trees and the undergrowth here. Aha! Oh, these are absolutely coming out into their best shape now, aren't they? You better tell us.
Yes, Matthew, they're foxgloves.
Oh,
Digitalis purpurea.
6 foot plus, some of these.
Oh, these will make 8, 9, and even 10 feet, 3 metres tall. And they've just started flowering. Each one in front of us has got, this particular one has got about, 50 little foxglove flowers on it, and still more to come, and it's still going, and that's now about getting on for 7 feet up, I suppose.
Lovely
That one.
violet shade.
Lots and lots of different colours, although it's Digitalis purpurea. There in the background is salmon colour ones, pure white just over there, through there.
So
and
these different mutations then?
yes, they crossbreed, and all sorts of different colours. So you have pale pink. This one in front of us is absolutely purple. And when you look in the little foxgloves themselves, you can see the little honey guide in there, and the bees go in and come out. In fact, it's just a bit on the cool side. If the sun was here, this would be swarming with bumblebees. Even in these cooler temperatures, just needs the sun on it to get the pollen and nectar going, and it's just an amazing sight. So you actually look right through, and they go off as far as the eye can see through the woodland. And I think that top trump really anything, the best work that you can do at Chelsea. And this has happened. This is nature's idea of how it should
Yes,
be.
you
if
haven't
you're-
seeded these and planted them
No,
out and
nothing
decided
at all.
where they go.
No, and it's a shade-loving plant. The bluebells are all done, flat on the ground. All the energy's now into the bulbs, and then the next layer of woodland flowers come into flower, and these are much more shade tolerant. They like this. You can actually feel if you stand up and down on the ground, it's very spongy, and that's acid peat that we're standing on, and on top of a hill.
I used to know someone who could have been called Acid Pete.
Oh, right, yes, yeah, very good, very droll, yes. And so they love this soil type, and there's a lot of history to it. Children used to pick the flowers, and you'd get up near the top because you have have small fingers and actually put your finger in the little bell-shaped flowers. And when you detach them, they generally have a little hook on the end where they're still attached, and you could actually get 5 on one hand, and it makes it look so you've got claws. And foxglove, yeah, that's so interesting, where nature's names come from. Oh, there, just saw... that'd be a queen buff-tailed bumblebee. There she is.
Oh, there. Yes.
Yes.
Coming
She's-
towards us.
She's coming right over here.
Yes. So obedient, your
Yes,
wildlife.
Obedient, of course. Yes.
She's gone right in the glove. Gone.
Just flew past. Another one there. That's a queen buff-tail. That's the original one I saw. And they are here. And once we're standing here a moment or two, suddenly the sun's just trying to come out. But the colour is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So it was a 18th century botanist that discovered some of the secrets of foxgloves. He was a pharmacist as well, and he discovered that people being treated with foxglove leaves for dropsy, which is where you have fluid retention in the body, were having miraculous recoveries. And so he decided to try and find out what was happening. So he did some experiments with foxglove leaves, and he found out that it wasn't the primary effect. It was the fact that the heart was beating stronger and slower, and that was dispelling all the fluid in the body, and it was so a roundabout cure for it. But he then discovered that the heart was being hugely affected by digitalis, which is the drug within foxgloves leaves. It's very, very powerful. And he did some experiments. If he made it a little bit too strong, he would kill his patients. And if it wasn't quite strong enough, it had no effect at all. So he realised he'd discovered something which is still used today in heart medicine. It's to sort of regulise the heart. Another bee just going in here. Actually, why we can't see them is because they're all up in the bells here. Just one gone on where the tip of my finger is.
And you can easily get your thumb in these, can't
Yeah,
you?
huge.
So,
There
oh,
she
there
is.
he is.
Yes.
There we go.
They're very shy. But look over there, there's a pure white one, which is a good 6'6", 7 feet tall. And they just love this soil. So one of the plants that we've learnt to live with, and it really forms a backdrop to a lot of modern garden displays. Those and delphiniums, they really stand out. But when nature does a display like this, I mean, you couldn't have, there's well over 1,000 just where we're standing.
And these just occur naturally.
This occurred naturally, and then again, a month's time or so, they'll have finished flowering. And I did teach you about a year ago how to get the seed of them. You run your hand all the way out the stalk, and you have these little capsules, and just rub them in your hands, and you get this tiny seed out. So each plant can produce over 10,000 seeds.
Oh, that's when the flowers have just gone over.
Yes, they're gone over,
And you
have
get the
little
seed.
Yep.
Handful of that.
Yep.
And then
you could spread it in your garden, or if you don't like your neighbour and want to cover up, you throw it over the garden fence, and it's a biennial. That's the problem with it. So you do have to wait a long time for displays like this. But then the seed from this year will drop on the ground and come into flower again in 2026.
So these foxgloves we can see here are only half the number you've got here, because there'll be another lot
yeah,
that come up
absolutely,
next year.
yes. So generally they'll all flower together like this. They're really good. So this is just an amazing display. It looks as though the people have been in here and planted them, and it's not like that at all. So it's just such a lovely sight, Matthew. It's almost tearful when you look through, and it's sprinkled all through the woodland there, and there's bracken and ferns coming up through it, and the elder is in flower. We'll look at that in a future podcast. It's time for elderflower wine that's coming up, so I think we get...
Oh, you've got my attention now.
Better get the still out and start brewing some. But just to see this, and to see that succession from the bluebells to this, because these were hardly visible when the bluebells first came out a month or so ago, and early purple orchids were in here. And so it's nature's actual doing what nature's meant to. If we stand back and let it all happen like it has done here, it's just mind-blowing.
The ducks at High Ash Farm going in to roost for an evening. Hey everyone, it's Matthew here, and if you've been enjoying our countryside podcasts, we've got a small favour to ask.
Yes, Matthew. What we're going to do is to ask for a small donation to help run the podcast, and any surplus goes for conservation at High Ash Farm here. And so it's really important. We'd both love to keep the podcast going, and that duck agrees with me, I think.
Well, it's straightforward to donate. You can make a one-off donation or set up a small monthly contribution, and the address is highashfarm.com/podcast.
We're hugely grateful for any support. It means we can keep sharing the stories of the countryside, which I love doing each week, but it's that small amount of cost we need to cover. So thank you very much in advance.
Foxgloves, and what do you put in gloves? Fingers, digitalis.
Digitalis, and that's where the Latin name comes from, and so you can get your little finger in. And I remember coming here once with my mum. I was only perhaps 6 years old, and she would pick one off the stalk. Let's just try it like this, like that. And she held both ends to close it, and then I don't know how she did it, but she somehow did a pop in the middle, and it would do a little pop like that before it opens up on the end. So there we are. Beautiful. Yeah, it's just, you don't need to say anything, it just takes your breath away.
On to the correspondence that comes in thick and fast to Chris's podcast. And we're next to the woodland with those wonderful foxgloves and looking out over some beautiful vistas. It's not brilliant blue sky and sunshine today, but there's some beauty about this sort of weather with the clouds coming through, isn't there?
Yes, it sort of makes the countryside into a patchwork quilt of colours as the sun sort of just comes through the cloud, which is now breaking up. But it's mild and near the end of May, and it's a super time of year. It's that transition now from certainly the end of spring to see the buttercups. That's a real sign that summer's here. And the foxgloves in flower behind us in the woodland, it just tells us that we're in summer at long last.
Well, thank you for all the emails that have come through. Ray Dumpleton is in sort of tuneful mood. I'm glad you enjoyed the verse, Chris, from Martin Simpson's song about the swallow a few weeks back. The next verse is about swifts. They arrived here over Manchester slightly earlier than usual on the 9th of May. So far just one pair though. Sadly the numbers decline each year. And he's given us some of the poem here. Swifts scythe and scream through the city dusk, late to come and first to leave. But come they do and leave they must. Hot August nights their absence grieve. And how we miss their impudent glee, this devil's bitch, this mystery, this sprite that sleeps upon the breeze and flies and feeds behind the storm.
How about that? Well, that's interesting because the word devil's bitch there, I had to think about that because the swift is generally a black-coloured bird, so there's no really relief. There's a tiny white patch of feathers under the bill, underneath the beak, which swells up when they catch lots of insects. And you'll often see them around churches, and they do nest in church towers, so hence devil's bitch. And it was thought in centuries gone by that the swifts were the souls of people that couldn't find a restful place, so they screamed trying to get into the graveyard at the church. And so because they couldn't find a place in heaven, they obviously were linked to hell, so the devil's bitch, in other words. And bitch had a different meaning back then. It was just a sort of connotation, meaning linked to something. And we still use that today because female otters are called bitches, and dogs obviously called bitches as well, the female version. But the devil's bitch, so I think that's where the name comes from, and it is used right through history. Got lots of references to it.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks for the verse as well. Johnny Griffiths in Norwich has sent us a photograph, sadly, of a dead owl. We came across this on a walk around your farm today, so it's one of your dead owls. Any ideas what might caused its demise, he asked?
Yes, it's very close to a neighbouring farm, and owls do reach old age and occasionally die. They're also very vulnerable when they're feeding on the ground. So tawny owls, little owls and barn owls all catch their prey on ground level. And the other thing that happens at the moment is there's quite a lot of rodents out in the Norfolk countryside, and many people are using rat bait, whereas it's not directed at owls, but the rats eat the bait, so do the mice, particularly long-tailed field mice and house mice. They will then crawl about in sort of the hours of darkness in a state of stupor, if you like, and the owls can eat them, and that can actually affect owls and actually kill them. It's a sort of unintended consequence of modern rodenticides.
Jan Felmingham. We must say hello to Jan and Jan's mum, who's 90 years old and listens avidly.
Excellent. Well done. Welcome to the podcast.
We're on her third listen for some of them. That's terrific, isn't it?
Goodness me, yes. So, and there's some lovely comments, and many comments this week about the benefits of listening to the podcast, and this really almost tearful, some of the comments.
Jan heard you speaking about your badgers so lovingly last week, and the badger funeral story. I know a lot of people were moved by that, and Jan said you moved me immensely listening to that.
Thank you. Yes, things we discover in nature. The badgers are mammals rather like us, and they have a lot of similar habits to us, as well as having arguments.
William Osborne, thank you for your notes here. Over the weekend I was walking from Worstead to Cromer in North Norfolk, and along the canal between North Walsham and Baxton Wood I spotted a mink running along the other side of the waterway. I've since read about them more and realised just how harmful they can be, but can't find anyone to report the sighting to. So William asked Chris, what would your advice be?
Right, well, first of all, you could ring up Norfolk Wildlife Trust. They would certainly have an interest in that. Mink were farmed, particularly in the eastern counties here, because way back in the 1940s and 50s, it was the height of fashion to wear a mink coat. It was top fashion item for ladies, and they even bred mink with some silver in their fur, silver mink, and that would be even more expensive. There were shops in Norwich selling mink coats, and so later on some mink escaped. These are American mink, and some also were released by animal rights people, and they got into our waterways. They're sort of a bit of a cross between a stoat and an otter, somewhere in there, so they will swim really well indeed. They can take coots and moorhen from underneath, and particularly baby ducklings. They will kill fish, and they will kill birds on their nests, and they just created a lot of havoc in Broadland, but numbers haven't really increased much recently. We're sort of on top of them by trapping and having to shoot them, and it's rather tragic. So I would give the local branch of Norfolk Wildlife Trust a call just to inform them.
Chris Masham has been reading... Chris from Masham, should I say. I think, Chris, your surname is big in, isn't it? He's been reading Mark Cocker, who's quite a famed naturalist and writer. He writes very well on the countryside, and he lives in Norfolk, doesn't he? Chris didn't... I don't know whether you realise that, Chris, but One Midsummer's Day by Mark Cocker, Chris says, is a terrific read. He mentioned going to a Norfolk farm to see swifts feeding on flea beetles. Could this have been high ash?
Well, it could have been high ash, but I think there's other people, particularly up in North Norfolk, are doing the same thing as me now, and growing fodder radish and mustard to attract the flea beetles, and then the swifts come and feed on the flea beetles when they swarm. It's kind of aerial plankton, I would call it. But I wasn't where Mark was here, but I've got 2 or 3 of his books, and they're all absolutely excellent. Flora Botanica and all sorts of other really great books to read.
Lots of emails here. We've got one here from Vermont. Jennifer Bishop, who is a regular listener, her and her husband Noel. So special mention to Noel, who particularly finds the podcast very comforting. Jennifer says, I think it's important for you to know that at least one other person in this world, you are making an impression. Your show is a highlight. and your enthusiasm a lifeline for someone that typically looks through a dark lens.
Yeah, so thank you for those comments. I know exactly what you mean. And it's just partly the reason we do the podcast. It reaches people who aren't as privileged as you and I are standing here looking over this fantastic vista with beautiful countryside all around us, and it kind of lifts the spirits in a way nothing else can. It's a delight to share the countryside with our listeners.
Here's one from Alan Hooper and Joanne Sheen in Gloucestershire. Dear Chris, Matthew, Rat and production team. I think Rat would feel like he's a bit too low on the billing there. Where's he gone?
He's asleep on the front seat of the truck here.
I'd like to thank you for your wonderful programmes. 2 years ago, I was suffering from mental health issues. I can honestly say a big part of my recovery was listening to you. Last week, my partner and I were in Norwich. We paid a quick visit to the farm where I saw my first swallows of the year, so a nice entry in my wildlife diary features High Ash Farm. On the way home, we visited Weeting Heath and saw stone curlews. That's Thetford Way,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is. That's the sort of headquarters of stone curlew. Yes, I think I went... I was just trying to think of the name that the Africans had given the stone curlew. Just come to me. They were called thickneys. And when you see a stone curlew, it's got these bright yellow legs, and right in the middle are these two bobbles, which are the knees. And that's the name, the local name for them. They were called thickneys. And they're migratory birds, very large eyes. And there they were, all rushing around underneath the mangrove swamps there, catching all sorts of invertebrates.
Say hello to Ingrid Bain. Ingrid's written a nice note for us. Ingrid Bain, living near Cambridge. P.S. Loved your rendition last week of Cecilia.
Yes, I changed the word to Phacelia because I grow the plant. In fact, it's growing right next to us, and the first one's already in flower. Excellent flower. If you want a nice, easy pollen and nectar plant to really attract the bees, then you can buy Phacelia in a lot of garden shops as seed, and it's a good time of the year to plant it, and it will come into flower sort of July, early August, and you'll be amazed at the insect life you can attract in your own garden. You don't need a big patch of it. Beautiful lilac blue flowers.
Here's another Chris. Chris is like you, loves the sparrows.
Yes.
And Chris says, recently visiting our local supermarket, we noticed each time a car parked up, sparrows flew down to the front of the vehicles, each one, and started picking insects from the front grills. Are the sparrows taking advantage of this source of insects for their young? Normally sparrows would be eating seeds, wouldn't it?
Yes, they certainly would, but seeds this time of the year are hard to come by. Not many seeds have ripened yet, and things like dandelions have, and things like groundsel, but sparrows will feed their young on insects at this time of the year. Several other bird species as well that feed on grain, things like grey partridge, they will feed their young on insects, and skylarks as well. So what they feed their young changes at this time of the year because caterpillars and insects have lots of moisture and protein in them, and it's ideal for young chicks in the nest particularly.
And just finally, here's Bob Borden's email. Bob lives, well, not many miles away from here in Norfolk. And Bob says, we've noticed, Chris, quite a few turquoise bird poos appearing around our home in Hemblington, near Norwich. This pictures, and there's a photo, these pictures show what was by far the biggest and looked like someone had tipped a cup of paint from the top of the house. There are quite a few smaller ones dotted around as well. We're surrounded by fields which have various crops in at the moment, mainly beet and mustard plants, and wondered if it was one of those that the birds were eating, as I can't think what berries would be around at the moment to cause this sort of colour.
Oh, you'd be surprised what berries are still about. Still, if you look in hedgerows, there are ivy berries, which are dark, sort of almost black in the skin, almost as a sort of reddish if you squash them in your fingers. And this particular one I've brought with us in the back of the car is Mahonia, and it comes into flower over the winter months, but at this time of the year it produces lots of these little berries. And if I take one off, and this is the gory bit.
Oh my goodness. There's blood everywhere.
It looks like blood, but when that goes through the bird's alimentary canal and comes out of the other end, it's exposed to acids as well, and it's already beginning to change colour, and it comes out as turquoise, so it could be any member of the Mahonia family as well. And lots of people grow it in their gardens, so nothing to do with sugar beet or any of the cereal crops at the moment. So there we are. Now I've got nicely stained fingers here. I hope it didn't splash you. So it
Looks like Ribena, that, doesn't it?
It looks as though you've been murdering somebody. There we are. So you can see it's all, nature's full of surprises, but when it's passed through the digestive system, it changes colour. And I've seen this many times, particularly in the autumn with blackberries. You can have almost sky blue or dark blue bird poo. What a subject to end on. The questions we get make me smile, really. Deer's footprint and now turquoise bird poo. But I could say what you need to do is to look for a turquoise bird.
Well, that's it from High Ash Farm for another week. It's been great fun and the time has whizzed by, and we've loved all your emails. Keep them coming in. The address, chris@countrysidepodcast.co.uk. Questions, comments, recipes, poems, whatever, we'd be delighted to hear from you.
Yeah, and they all make me smile, which is lovely. Thank you.